Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having some fun. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about a very unique group of antelopes that live in Africa. Today we're talking about duikers. That's a weird word. It looks weird, it sounds weird, it's tough to pronounce. The word is based on an Afrikaans word. Afrikaans is a language that is a mixture between Dutch, a little bit of English, and a little bit of native African tribal dialects that was created in colonial South Africa. Afrikaans were kind of the Europeans who moved to Africa to colonize it and settle it, and then they stuck around for a couple hundred years. And during that time, their Dutch language kind of got morphed into what is called Afrikaans. But the word that they named this group of animals is called duikerbok, which means diving buck. They are medium to small-sized antelopes that live in the forest areas of Africa. Although some do show up a little bit more in the savanna setting, most of them live in kind of darker forest reasons, darkest forest areas for good reasons. And that is because they are small, they have small horns, and there's a lot of things that want to eat them. So they're a little bit safer if they can hide kind of in the shadows and the shade of the forest, like where I'm standing today. The duikers are all very similar in a lot of regards, so we're going to talk about them in general first. Most of them are so close genetically that they are in the same genus as far as scientific classifications go, and that genus is called Cephalophus, which means head crest. They have kind of little mohawks, a little bit like my own hair, that kind of stand up, and especially if they're alert or possibly threatened by potential predators, those hairs stand up more on them. Some of them have it kind of more between their horns. Some of them it goes all the way down their spine across their back. There are 19 species of duikers, but like I said, a lot of them kind of share a common traits, and so we're going to talk about some of those first before we get into any of the specific species. So they all kind of have this hair that stands up called a head crest, but it's not always just on their head. And then they also have, and if you look at the photos I posted earlier today, they have a little mark on their face that kind of runs from their nose up towards their eyes. That is called a preorbital gland. So pre being before, orbital being eye. So before the eyes, they have this little line, and it's a gland that they use for scent marking. We talked about this a little bit with some other species in the past. I don't specifically remember who we talked about that with, but I do know I remember explaining it a bit. Preorbital glands are very important for duikers. They use them to mark their territory, as they are very territorial. So it's a scent gland. It creates a little oil, and they'll kind of jab their face against little sticks and branches to leave kind of this musky, oily kind of smell around, that others in the area will know that this spot of the forest is taken. Duikers are kind of short, with fairly short legs, and they kind of have an arched back because their back legs are longer than their front legs. So they kind of have like this humped back kind of look to them. And they have short, straight horns that grow kind of at the top of their head, but point backwards a little bit. But even in the biggest species, they're only like maybe 5-6 inches long. So they're little horns. They kind of blend in quite a bit, especially if they have that big tuft of hair between their horns. The horns are useful. Some of their predators that they have to deal with and worry about the most are cats, specifically leopards, and then there's a smaller cat called the golden cat in Africa. Cats are going to try to grab them by the back of the neck. So these little backward facing horns are really good to like jab towards that potential predator to get them off of their neck and back area. Duikers have this really weird way of walking. They're very cautious, and so typically in the forest they kind of move one leg up at a time and they lift it really high, and then they place it down, and then they look around, they listen, they smell, and then they move their next leg. It kind of gives them a little bit of an awkward look when they're walking, especially if they're in a new area and if they're feeling really cautious. They do have, like I mentioned, some really great senses. They have really good eyesight. They have a very, very good sense of smell, and really good hearing. Typically with animals, you can tell what senses are important by what features on their head or their face are bigger or emphasized more. And with duikers, one ways that you know that they have a really good sense of smell, they have a wet nose. So the tip of their nose, and you can see it in the last picture that I posted today, that's a yellowback duiker, but he has a shiny nose, kind of like a dog's nose. Shiny nose helps them to attract more molecules into their nose and be able to smell a bit better. So sense of smell is very important for them. That's also how they communicate with those orbital glands, with their sense of smell marking their territory. Duikers are pretty interesting in what they eat. Most antelope usually eat grass, and if they don't eat grass, then they eat leaves of bushes and trees. And duikers will eat some leaves, but they're more interested in fruit. They love fruit, they love seeds and nuts. They'll occasionally eat some roots and flowers, and they'll eat some leaves as well. They don't really care for grass too much, they don't eat it much. But the weird thing with duikers is that on occasion, they eat other animals. So here's a hoofed animal, an antelope, that sometimes eats other animals. They will eat small birds, bird eggs, sometimes some rodents. Usually it's more little things like insects, maybe some worms, and occasionally they'll eat bigger things that are dead, that something else has killed or has died, and if food is scarce, they'll nibble a bit on a dead body. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But it's a little strange that a hoofed animal will occasionally eat some meat, but duikers are one of the species that does. They also have a little interesting social structure. Usually most hoofed animals live in big groups where there's lots of eyes paying attention for danger. They kind of hang out in safety in numbers. Not the case with duikers. Duikers typically live in pairs, a male and a female, that are monogamous. They usually only breed with each other. They set up a territory. And even though they're together, they actually spend most of their time apart, just in the same territory. So they're cool, like, oh, hey, she's over there, I'm gonna be over here. And they'll see each other on occasion, but they don't hang out together all the time. They're kind of solitary, which is a little odd, again, for a hoofed animal, especially one on the smaller size that could be potential prey for a lot of things. With that, they do defend their territories that they mark with their scent glands, and either the male or the female or both will try to chase away anything that comes into their territory. They have very little tolerance for other hoofed animals in their space. Although if it's a different enough species, they're okay with it, but if it's the same species as them, they'll definitely try to chase them out. Like I mentioned, they're kind of shy, they're very elusive, they're really good at hiding, they don't make a lot of noise, and they like to hang out in shadows and kind of blend in. That's because lots of things try to eat them. Since they mostly are woodland, forested area creatures, things like leopards are their biggest predator, but there's also some big snakes in Africa that would eat them, especially the babies. I mentioned the golden cat. That's kind of a medium-sized cat, so bigger than a house cat. But also they'd have to worry about hyenas. African painted dogs sometimes come in the forest. Some of the duikers live on the edge of the forest near the grasslands. Also eagles, there's some really big eagles in Africa that would definitely go after duikers. And then there's some primates that would eat them too. Things like baboons, sometimes chimpanzees, catch duikers. They're one of the little forest antelopes that they go after. And then their biggest predator lately is people. People love to eat duikers. They set traps for them. They hunt them with spears. They hunt them with guns. And they love to eat duikers. So I mentioned that there are 19 species of duikers. 2 of them are endangered, 2 of them are vulnerable, and 3 of them are near threatened. So together that is 7 of the 19. 11 of those 19 are least concern, so they're still in very healthy numbers, which is very nice. 1 is data deficient. That means we don't know enough about it yet, so more research is needed. With most species of duikers, though, their population is declining, so those that aren't yet threatened could become so in the near future. I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 species in specific today. They are all the ones that I pictured earlier today. So if you looked on Instagram, the first photo that is posted is a red-flanked duiker. Red-flanked duikers are among the smallest of duikers. They're really not much smaller or not much bigger than a house cat. They're about 12 to 15 inches tall, so pretty short to the ground. They're about 24 inches in length, so about 2 feet, and they only weigh about 15 to 20 pounds. So they're the same size as like a medium-sized dog or a house cat, a little bit bigger than a house cat maybe. They live in West Africa, not near the coast, but just inland from it, kind of where Africa bumps out in those countries along there. The second photo that I posted is actually a baby yellowback duiker, so that's the same species as the fourth photo. But you can see as my hand's reaching out, that little guy is pretty small, although at that age, I think that baby was just under a week old, so pretty good sized baby. That baby is actually bigger than a red-flanked duiker is. So some of the red-flanked duikers are tiny, and when they're born, they're just like itty-bitty little guys like this. Usually weighing like a pound or a pound and a half for the red-flanked duikers. The third picture then is a black duiker. They are about 12 to 15 inches tall. They're about 24 inches in length, and they weigh about 40 pounds. So they're a medium-sized duiker. There's a lot of duikers that are that size. They also live in the West African countries where Africa kind of bumps out into the Atlantic Ocean. And they live right down to the coast and through a lot of the forested areas, all the way over to Nigeria, which is where Africa kind of turns down. And in that area, there's a lot of people that live there, and black duikers tend to be one of the species that is doing better with a lot of people coming in, although they are still declining a bit in population. With the animals that I worked with at the LA Zoo, one of them that we absolutely could not go in with was a black duiker. So even though they're little, they only weigh 40 pounds, they're only about 32 inches long, he was still very, very dangerous. And he had sharp little horns that are only about 3 to 4 inches, but he knew how to use them. And if you stepped into his space, he would come running at you, making a sound similar to a goat, and he would try to gore you with those little horns. And so we absolutely could not go in with him. His name was Josh, which was also funny because that was the name of our big boss, and he was named after him. So Josh, the black duiker, was very dangerous for us. We always had to be very careful with knowing where he was and shift him into his little barn space before going into his exhibit space. We went in with much, much bigger animals than him, but Josh just had the temperament that we had to avoid him, or he would try to kill us. The others of his species were totally cool, and we could go in with them. So it was just a personality thing with him, which was an interesting thing as a zookeeper. You had to really know the personality and demeanor of the animals and the signs and body language that they would give off if they felt comfortable with you, if they felt threatened by you, or if they felt like they needed to aggressively interact with you, like Josh did. The fourth photo that I posted today, and also the second one, which is the baby, are yellow-backed duikers. They are the largest of all duiker species. They live kind of more central West Africa, kind of where Africa takes that big bend. They live through a lot of the same forested areas like chimpanzees do, and a bit into the space where gorillas live as well. They are quite a bit bigger than the others, although there are a couple other species kind of in their size range. They're about 34 inches tall, so almost 3 feet off the ground. That's the biggest that duikers get. But they have a pretty hefty weight. They can weigh about 180 pounds. So despite being fairly short, they actually have a decent amount of weight behind them. And they would definitely make a good meal for predators. They also have short horns. Their horns are about 6 inches long, and they know how to use those as well. So we had to be careful around them, but we could work in with them. With all duiker species, they kind of face two major threats. The threats are, number one, bushmeat. That is where people from cities in Africa are wanting to eat animals from the bush or the forest or the wild areas of Africa. And they are now hunted almost on a commercial scale to supply food for restaurants in city areas. Sometimes they are also exported to restaurants in Europe, in Asia, and in the United States for people to eat as well as delicacy meats. So please be very aware if you're ever eating something and you don't know what that is, or if it sounds like an exotic animal, don't eat it. You're contributing to a very dangerous exploitation of an animal population and hunting unregulated for many species that are on the brink of being endangered. So that is a very big problem with duikers. They live in forested areas, so poachers usually set snares, which are wires that are triggered in a loop. So the animal steps in and then takes a step, and the wire closes in around their leg, and then they are stuck there. Sometimes the poachers don't come back for a day or two, and sometimes the animal has struggled and suffered for several days before dying on its own. They are often still sold as meat to be consumed by people, even if they died in that stressed state. So probably not the healthiest choice to be eating them either. The other big threat for duikers is habitat loss, as people in that area of Africa, many of the forested countries, continue to cut down the forest to grow agriculture, to expand cities and farms and places where people need to live, as well as clearing the trees for lumber use or to open up roads to get in and mine precious minerals that exist in many parts of Africa. Habitat loss is a leading cause of a lot of problems with a lot of species in Africa, and we've talked about it quite a bit in here. With my experience with duikers, I had never really been around them much prior to my moving to Los Angeles. The other zoos I had been working at didn't have any duiker species, and the Los Angeles Zoo is actually one of the zoos in the United States that specializes in duikers. And at any given point, we probably had about 20 to 30 duikers on property at the zoo, with multiples of each species in breeding situations. And although they live in only pairs usually, much of that happened behind the scenes where people didn't even know they existed. Especially the first picture, the little red flank duikers, they're super flighty, they get scared easy, and they're tiny. So we didn't even have any of them on exhibit during my time at the LA Zoo. We found that they were much more calm if they were away from zoo guests, so they lived behind the scenes. And that's just kind of a good example of you don't always know what's there at the zoo and what might be happening in places that are off exhibit, which is where a lot of our special breeding programs took place for duikers. There are other duiker species out there other than the 3 I talked about. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 19 total. There is a really cool program going on in Tanzania. There's a type of duiker that lives in just a few little pockets of Tanzania. I don't remember that specific species name at this point. I'll be sharing their story later on Facebook, but they're super endangered. They live in just a very limited area, and the government of Tanzania has access to an island that's off the coast where there's no people that live there, and there's also no predators on that island. So in 2005 or 2006, they took 5 of this little endangered duiker out there and introduced them to this island that didn't have a lot of other animals on it, but was good duiker habitat. And now they have reproduced, and there's over 30 of them on that island. So that's very good news. And they're now sharing them with other conservation areas where they hope to also boost that population a little further. So I'll be sharing that later on the Facebook page. But I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you about duikers today. They're really cool animals. Being an antelope, there's a lot of things that they have in common with other antelopes, but also a lot of things that are very, very unique and different with them. One thing I also found interesting, for antelope species, they actually have the largest brain in proportion to their body size. So they are maybe a little higher functioning and a little smarter than other antelope species. And they definitely were very good at using their senses and working with them compared to other antelopes. Other antelope kind of seemed more driven about, like, there's food, I want to eat the food. Oh, there's that person, he brings us food. That's kind of all they understood or knew sometimes. Whereas like the duikers kind of had a little higher level of functioning, knowing who different people were. And some of them actually enjoyed little scratches or pets, and we could interact with them. Some of them we could hand feed, and they would take food right out of our hands. And they knew kind of a routine a little better too, which was really great. I very much enjoyed my time being a zookeeper in the Los Angeles Zoo and working with the duikers. So that was a highlight of one of the species, or 3 species, that I got to work with. I'll be posting more information about them later today on the Facebook profile, so look for that. And as always, feel free to like, follow, share, and subscribe to any and all of my Zoo Nerd content across Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com. Until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun. See ya.